Hello students, in today's lecture we are going to discuss A Room of One's Own summary by Virginia Woolf, and in the summary we'll see that the writer Woolf opens the essay by insisting that a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. So this is a basic thesis. She admits that one that leaves the problem of the true nature of women and the true nature of fictions unsolved. But having been asked to write about the topic of women and fiction, she hopes to shed some light on how she arrived at this thesis. To tell the story of how she did this, Woolf proposes that she uses her abilities as a novelist to write a fictionalized version of the events that led to this thesis and the 2 days that preceded this realization. Thus begins the narrative portion of the essay. So, on the banks of a river in the fictional University of Oxbridge, the narrator sits fishing. So, as she fishes, or as she is like fishing, she ponders how to write about women and fiction. So, here she says that she uses the act of fishing as a metaphor for thinking, saying that her thought had let the line down in the stream and were waiting for an idea is to bite. Now, as she sits, she is interrupted by the beadle, a security guard at the university. The beadle says the narrator that women are not allowed to walk on grass, and she hurries back to the gravel path, and nothing that she lost her little fish idea in the conversation. So, finally, coming next, the narrator tries to go to the university library to view an essay by Charles Lamb, only to be told that ladies are not allowed in the library unless they are accompanied by a man. So, here again she is angry. The narrator vows never to ask for hospitality again. The narrator is distracted by an assembly outside the chapel and the sound of organ music. She thinks about the university as a sort of laboratory with the students such as specimens that have no place outside of it. So, at lunch, the narrator is again distracted by the sight of a cat without tail. She uses this as a metaphor to relate that there is something missing in the lunchroom atmosphere. So, the narrator now recalls a similar lunch that she attended before First World War, and she feels that the conversation that people have over lunch have changed since the war as well as the poetry that they wrote. Now, no longer are the romantic poems of Tennyson and Rossetti welcome in the post-war country. So, this difference between the pre and post-war poetry is, to the narrator, a difference of celebrating feelings that one used to have versus new feelings that people cannot even fully comprehend. Here, the narrator describes a meal at Fenham, a relatively new women's college. The meal is lacking, and the narrator feels that a condensed sense of advantage begins to reduce one's feeling of power and ambition. So, the conversation is not as deep as one would expect at a school, and the narrator retires to her friend Mary Seton's room with a feeling of disappointment. She and Mary talk about how difficult it was to get funding to start a women's college versus how easy it is to fund a men's college. The narrator here wonders why women have always been so poor, why Mary's mother and her mother before her did not learn the art of making money and preserving it for their daughter's education. Because it is patriarchal society, or the society was patriarchal, so everything was preserved for the education or for the betterment of the male, not for the females. That's why she is regretting that why their mother had not worked and not preserved the money for the education of their daughters. Now, she notes that until recently, women had no legal right to their money or land and were considered property themselves. That means they were not, forget about the rights that they would be having over the property, but they themselves were claimed to be or considered to be property. Now, she reflects on the gentility and privacy which are the privilege of only the rich and the effect of tradition in this sense of the mind of a writer. Now, again back in London, the narrator continues to ponder these questions as she tries to write about women and fiction. she decides on a trip to British Museum to stain off what was personal and accidental in all these impressions, and so reach the pure fluid, the essential of the truth. That means to find the essential truth. So in the catalog section of the British Library, the narrator searches for a book about women and marvels at how many there are. When she checks for books on men, she finds no archive on the topic. Now, reading through a few of these books at random, she pauses in anger at one professor's assertion of the mental, moral, and physical inferiority of women. She feels that these type of assertions are the result of a deep-seated anger that does not allow these experts to view the sexes objectively. Further, she wonders why they are angry and then realizes that their anger made her angry as well. She decides that these male experts are more interested in preserving their own high opinion of male superiority than they are of anything to do with the women. Now, after she eats her lunch and pays the bill, the narrator informs the reader that she was left a legacy of 500 pounds pounds a year by her aunt, named Mary Baton. She recalled that she was told about this through a letter on the same day that women were given the right to vote, and that the money was more important to her personal freedom, because the money is going to give her that personal freedom which she always required or needed. Now, the money relieved her of the need to work and seemed to give her a higher temper towards many things in life, including men. Now, she began seeing men as victims of their own devices in a sense. Further, she feels that having financial independence gave her the freedom to think of things in themselves. Now, the narrator thinks about the difference between the historical labor provided by men and women and thinks that there is no way to quantify which was more valuable. She dreams about a future where there will be no gender division in labor. Disappointment at not having found the truth that she was looking for at the British Library, the narrator returns home, and she begins to think about the lives of English women in the Elizabethan era. So this was a period of unquestionable literary achievement, but only for men. The legal rights of women at this time were non-existent. So this fact seems to the narrator to be not in keeping with the progressive and strong female character from literature from ancient times to present day. Now further, narrator says, a very queer composite being thus emerges. Imaginatively, she is of the highest importance. Practically, she is completely insignificant. Although, according to Woolf, in real life, this woman would have probably not been able to read or write, some of the literature's most inspiring and witty words come from her mouth. So, the narrator wonders if the sum of this problem could be arrived at by combining both real history and fiction. So, the narrator explores this idea by conjuring up a female version of Shakespeare. Judith Shakespeare is as talented as William, but does not receive a men's education as he did. Although she is gifted with more free time, although Judith is the apple of her father's eye, she is expected to conform to the society's standard for women and would not have been allowed to explore her talent because she is a woman. Now she writes when she can live in secret, but then hides or destroys her work so that it will not be found. When she becomes engaged at a young age, she begs her father not to marry and is scolded and beaten by her father, because that is the responsibility, or that is the work of the work, that she has to get married early and obviously bear children. So afterward she runs away. She wishes to go into acting, but is shamed and ridiculed for this. She is eventually taken in by a theatre manager who gets her pregnant. She later then commits suicide. So this is an example of how a woman with Shakespeare's gifts might have lived at that time, at the same time. However, the narrator asserts that such a woman could never have existed, as genius is not found among the laboring and uneducated people. Now, in that time, if a woman was a genius, she was thought to be a witch or a lunatic. Many anonymous authors of that time were most likely women. So, having dissected this question, the narrator wonders what the ideal state of mind is for creation. She observes the obstacles against creating works of genius, the difference of the majority of the world, and the different forms of discouragement. While this is true for all artists, it is even more true for women. So, unless a woman came from an exceptionally wealthy family, she would not even have a room of her own, and her spending money and free time were totally at discretion of others. That means the men of the family or men of the household would decide what a woman has to do in her life. Also, being told all her life that women were less intelligent than men, she would probably have lowered view of her own abilities. That means she would underestimate her own abilities. So, the lack of any female role models in this area would make this low self-confidence even worse for a female. So, this is all for the summary discussion today. We will continue with this in the next lecture. Thank you all.